Nick Green is an entrepreneur, board-certified behavior analyst, PhD student, and fitness enthusiast that focuses on improving the health and fitness of others through practice and research. Nick's previous experiences include 5 years of clinical work with individuals diagnosed with developmental disabilities, working within organizations to evaluate and improve processes, managing and overseeing the training of small teams. His experience in education bring a unique perspective when designing pro-health solutions. Nick's main focus and research interest is reducing sedentary behavior, too much sitting in the workplace. His passion is to improve human performance and health with behavior analysis. When Nick is not in a book or writing, he enjoys raising his son Ogden, training his dog Pete, improving productivity, Olympic weightlifting, and CrossFit. Nick founded his own company, BehaviorFit, in 2016, where he blogs, creates content, delivers workshops, and most importantly, provides telehealth coaching to help adults increase physical activity and fitness-related behaviors. Hope you all enjoy The Office is Too Physically Inactive by Nick Green.
All right, can you guys see and hear me okay? Can I get a confirmation on the chat? I'll go ahead and share my screen here real quick. Let me see. Share. All right, can you see my title screen with the title? Let me check here. It looks like it. Yep, great. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. So thank you guys for joining me today. I know it's Friday before the 4th. I'm just excited to present. Thank you again for the opportunity by the OBM Network, and let's do it. We only have an hour. So here's just a brief agenda. I'm going to introduce myself, tell you about my brief background. I'm going to talk about movement and in general, and I'll talk about my research, and we'll discuss some real-world issues as it relates to productivity. And then if we have some time, we'll take some questions, and feel free to go ahead and ask questions during the chat, and we can go from there. So without further ado, just a little bit about me. I'm currently a PhD student at the University of Florida in Gainesville. I only have one more year to go, so I'm very excited about it. So right on the star there in the middle of the state. My lab is, we all study some form of health behavior. So we have formed our own lab called BHAT. I got my master's degree in organizational behavior management at FIT a couple years back. Before that, before stepping into the academic world, I did spend a great amount of time in the clinical setting, kind of getting my feet wet. That's how I was introduced into behavior analysis, working as a direct therapist for a few years, eventually moving my way up, doing some middle management type things. And so that was kind of like my foundation of experience. And then as it relates to my professional endeavors, I founded my company, BehaviorFit, 3 years ago now, in which I target health and fitness with organizations and individuals, and we'll kind of discuss that throughout. Just as a show of hands or in the text message here, how many people have heard of the phrase "sitting is the new smoking"? And I have my iPad here, that's why I'm looking down. So just go ahead and let me know if you've heard of this phrase before. Thanks to NextGen, yes. Oh, there's Dana. Hi, Dana. Good, Maggie, Dennis, a couple people. Yeah, hi. I heard another one of your talks. That's funny. Okay, so well, some of you may be familiar with this information, but if you're maybe watching this for the first time online, we'll just start at the beginning. I'll kind of unpack a couple things and talk about what the key is behind this phrase. So just in general, just basic evolution here. We are humans. We've adapted to move. So we have this beautiful muscular system, nerves, tendons, everything has been adapted for us to move efficiently in our environment. So we have arches in our feet and toes that allow us to move forward. Our glutes behind us allow us to stabilize. And our hips, they face sideways so we can stand upright. And our spine has a nice S-curve, right? If we're nice and healthy. So just in general, if we buy into science a little bit, we as humans, we need to move. And if we think about the consequences that are involved with moving in everyday life, we think about the effort when it comes to food. So our ancestors walked a lot. There were no cars, right? So just in general, these are some anthropological data that females and males respectively, walked 6 to 9 miles, each day to get food, right? That's the meaningful consequence, the reinforcing value of movement was accessing food and surviving. But today the issue is our effort is near zero. And so what does that look like? Even if we go to, I have a brand new Whole Foods that just opened up here in Gainesville. They have beautiful food, but all I have to do is just casually just stroll through the supermarket and, buy those things. We even have apps, right? You can have an app and have food delivered to you, fresh organic foods right at your door. Or you have, something like Jimmy John's, which I love. Freaky fast to your door. But you can see the physical activity has been slowly engineered out of our daily habits and routines. And so if we look at a basic kind of XY chart here, we see, again, 9 miles a day for males, 6 miles a day for females. Anybody know? Just say in the chat box, how much general activity should we be getting a day when it comes just to like walking and moving? Go ahead and think about it. Anybody know the common recommendation that's out there? If so, go ahead and put it in the chat box. Going once, going twice. All right, well, the general recommendation that we are most familiar with is that 10,000 steps per day. And even then, most Americans aren't meeting that. So, we're not doing as much activity, not engaging in as much activity as our ancestors did. So when it comes to, how does this impact our day and what does that mean for research and where is this headed? Well, we think about inactivity and its effects on chronic disease. So just basic stats here, a lot of preventable disease, obesity, 2/3 of the US adults are overweight and obese. We aren't moving, adults aren't moving, the youth are not moving, and it's predicted by 2030, we'll have over half the adult population will be inactive and overweight. So if we make this kind of like a business reason to attack physical inactivity, obesity right there, its association with inactivity is $2 trillion, the world costs per year. So there's huge opportunity. It's like behavior analysts, OBMers, if we can just get like 1% on 1%, we can have probably 100 companies working on these different areas. So when we're talking about inactivity, what else are we talking about? It's really sedentary behavior. And there's a whole research network initiative behind this. And this is their definition of sedentary behavior, just so we know we're on the same page here, that it's any activity characterized by energy expenditure less than 1.5 metabolic equivalents, which is an exercise physiology. Sorry, there's a car that was honking there. Real world, we're live. Metabolic equivalents in a sitting and reclining posture. So basically what we want to think about is sedentary behavior is essentially sitting and not engaging in a lot of activity. And sedentary behavior is now associated with obesity. Those correlations bring on diabetes, CVD, various cancers, early death. That's what it comes down to, all-cause mortality. So too much sitting, it's not the best. And so what's unique about sedentary activity is that it's distinct from other parts of our day when we think about the 24-hour window. So if we have our 16 waking hours here or a 24-hour window, think about it there. You have 10 hours, so 16 out of the 24 hours. 10 hours here is that sedentary time. So we're sitting. This is just what adults engage in. We might engage in light activity for 4 hours a day, which would be, household chores, getting ready for work. And those of us that do meet exercise recommendations each day engage in that moderate, vigorous physical activity, which is, that purposeful exercise. So that sedentary time encompasses a large part of our day. So it's very important to think about how we spend that part of our day. So essentially, you've kind of gotten the drift here. What's so bad about sitting is that it's an independent risk factor. And what that means is that even if you exercise, it's not protective enough against these preventable diseases. And I'll show you some data here momentarily. And in general, kind of the key term here is that general greater sitting time is associated with this early death and cardiovascular disease. And this is robust across many different researchers, many different disciplines. So in exercise and metabolism research, people that study diabetes, they find that moving more is good for blood sugar levels, things like that. and it affects everybody. So that's another thing, that it's not just, maybe sedentary office workers, which I talk about. We got to think about our kids, right? I have a 3-month-old son, and I think about, oh man, he's going to go into these schools and he'll be sitting a lot, but hopefully we can get to some environmental change before that. So, and recently in 2017, Diaz came out with a study that just showed that the total duration, that volume, how many minutes per day is an independent risk factor, and that average bout duration. So how much on average are you basically kind of sitting? Is it 5 minutes, 30 minutes at a time? What do those relationships look like? And we'll get into that here just briefly. So this gets at kind of the independent risk factor when it comes to exercise. So on our primary x-axis here, we have the amount of sitting, and I'll bring up my pen. So we have here is the amount of sitting per day. So think about if you sit for 0 to 4 hours a day, and then your secondary y-axis here is your minutes of activity going this way, and then the y-axis is your risk of death. So what that means is basically the less active you are, even if you sit going this way, the more you're at risk. So you have a group of people that don't sit that much and exercise a lot. They are at less risk for death than people that don't sit and don't engage in any exercise. That's pretty intuitive. I think that kind of makes sense. So we have now is, let me go ahead and clear the pen real quick. I just go ahead and reset. Okay, it didn't reset. We'll just move on. So now that relationship carries over the more you sit. So you can see how those arrows, those bars go ahead and increase. And so what this means is as the total sitting time increases, so we move this way, so does the risk of death. So those, they all go in the wrong direction. So we can see that people that exercise more, the green bars, than the red bars are better off than the people back here. So those are kind of the data. And what does that mean for you? You can think about which category are you in, how much do you sit each day, and how much exercise do you engage in. So think about it like this, do you want to change categories? So you could be maybe in this green one or back here, but I think timely, what would be kind of an interesting comparison is that you have somebody like Cristiano Ronaldo. World Cup's going on, perfect timing for myself as a football fan that there are no games on today, but he likely engages in a lot of physical activity each week and does not sit very much. And he's pretty fit and trim. Whereas somebody like our quintessential Homer Simpson here, he probably hangs out in the 0 exercise category and sits most of his day. So you want to be in this area of the bars, not so much over here. You with me? Any questions about that so far? I'll go ahead and look at the chat box. Doesn't look like it. All right. So exercise is good and sitting less is good. So the main point here, even if you exercise, meet those guidelines, your risk for various diseases and cancers increase. So that's why the movement piece is super important. So the more you sit, the greater your risk for those preventable diseases. So if we go back to that that phrase that I started to talk off with, this whole sitting versus smoking thing, what it comes down is this kind of a mathematical equation where it's for every hour you sit watching TV or listening to a lecture, like myself right now, your life expectancy, so think about those mortality outcomes, decreases by 22 minutes. So that's been highlighted in the research. And then for smoking, we all can agree that smoking is bad for us. So for every cigarette you smoke, your life expectancy decreases by 11 minutes. So it probably should, I don't know if the math works out. If you sit and smoke, that's 33 minutes. Probably doesn't work like that. But that's kind of the relationship in which journalists go ahead and kind of write these kind of taglines. But, it's meaningful and it kind of makes sense for a lot of people. So kind of the converse of this is that you can improve your health by, like I said before, increasing that exercise time or reducing your sitting time. You can see like myself right now, I'm standing, moving around. And so I'm trying to, maybe lead by example, if you will, and reduce my own sitting time each day. And when we do this, we get all kinds of benefits. So we can improve metabolism, circulation, reduce those risks, and reduce obesity. So, we heard the bad, but also the good is when we get moving, the opposite kind of happens. And that's kind of clear in the research now. And the last bit of kind of population data, which I want to share with you, is that, first we talked about the exercise being important. Now we're looking at the total volume of the day. So how much time you sit each day. Is it 10 hours, 11 hours, 13 hours? And the average duration of the sitting period. So this graph here, if we look at just follow-up years and mortality on the y-axis, the researchers broke it down into different quartiles. So all this is Q1 means that you sit for 11 and a half hours or less, Q2 the next hour, Q3 the next, and then Q4 upwards of 13 hours of sitting. Pretty much you're waking up and you're sitting all day. And so what we see is going from 12 and a half to greater than 13 is a fourfold increase, which is dramatic. So that amount of time that you accumulate through sitting is very dangerous, and that mortality percentage is much higher. And then with this research, the researchers had individual participants wear objective physical activity recorders. They're actigraphs, I believe. And so these are all good objective data. And for the, so that was the duration, and now we look at the average bout time. The researchers broke up the quartiles again, and they just looked at average minutes. And so basically here, again, smaller quartiles, Q1, meaning you sit on average only 8 minutes, and then this is upwards of 12 minutes. That goes hand in hand with the total duration. So again, you get that fourfold increase of when your average time of sitting down like this is closer to that 10 to 12 mark, that's when your mortality percentage increases. So it's very important to look at both of these variables. And for that, I think that was a great time. Now that I've kind of scared you all out of your seat, let's go ahead and take a quick standing movement break. If you're playing along at home, go ahead and stand up. I can't see all of you, but maybe in the chat box, just take 10 to 15 seconds and let me know that you took a break. And I always like to do this. I'm holding my phone now. I always like to do selfies during my presentations. I'll just go ahead and take your word for it. I'll just do it with my screen and just say like, hey, I trust that everybody in the room did it. So on the count of 3, you can go ahead and wave even though I can't see you. But we'll go ahead. We'll take a picture. And I'll say, hey, it's time for a moving break. It's got to happen all the time, everybody. All right. 1, 2, 3, wave, smile, move. Perfect. All right. So hopefully everybody took their break. Stretch it out. Rotate your arms, whatever you need to do. We can talk about specific exercises later. I'm already up and moving. Stretch it out. Okay, good. That was a good little break. So you can see working on those breaks, super important. So we have all this research. What is everybody telling us to do? So fortunately, the leading experts in this area put a paper together and recommended for us to follow a few different things. So it's reducing that total sitting time, which we saw from the Diaz data, and we need to move every 30 minutes. And we can see here, the movement of every 30 minutes hovers around kind of this range of 20 to 30 to 40 to 60. So every 30 minutes is a good rule of thumb. And these other studies here, these kind of come from some ergonomic literature where it's when you move more, you get less back pain, better shoulder health, things like that. Some of these studies are related to metabolism. So when you move a little bit more, you have better glucose levels, things like that. So those are the 2 recommendations. So reducing total time and moving every 30 minutes. And that second one there is what I hit on in my research. So the goal of my research, this is me at my one of my earlier versions of my standing desks on campus, is to just create and refine this methodology to kind of study sitting in a single case design. A lot of the research that's out there very useful. It's mainly kind of group design, so you just can't see how well people are moving or not. That's what our bread and butter is with behavior analysis. That's kind of my goal, is to kind of create a good methodology. And of course, it's good to have some nice, sexy data too. And so my kind of sequence of, I'm just checking any notes here. Nope. If you have any comments, questions, just let me know. My kind of sequence, my research line here has been with my master's thesis at FIT. You can check that out in Java. And then I recently have a manuscript this says Java too, but it got accepted to another journal, so I'm writing that up. And then my third project, which needs to be written up, I'm looking at kind of shaping in the workplace, and that's the article that we'll get into a little bit today. But just in general, what I look at when I'm targeting sitting specifically in the workplace is that my participants are office workers, and I'm working on the target behavior of some form of objective physical activity. I'll show you step data today. In my master's thesis, I used an Inactive, which tracked those bouts and that duration of sitting. And in general, my phases are I'll have individuals go through baseline, they'll wear the monitor and the device, and my intervention will be some combination of different components of education, feedback, and goal setting. So my first study, these are just some brief findings here. So I compared education as it relates to prompting and feedback and goal setting. I had to graduate, so I couldn't manipulate any other interventions further. But the final phase did produce some desirable effects, but I couldn't demonstrate experimental control. Only in 3 subjects, the interventions were not effective in the sense that I didn't see a rapid alternation of sitting, moving, standing, things like that. But it was a good first study to kind of get into the wheelhouse of what it means to be a sedentary researcher. My second study, which has been accepted, and it's I need to revise a few things, is that I compared an education phase, so teaching people that, hey, sitting's bad for you, a little bit of the literature that I cited earlier in this presentation, compared to giving feedback by themselves and feedback plus some task clarification. So, okay, you moved, but you didn't move enough. So what does that look like? So overall, it produced desirable effects for half of those participants, but I didn't attempt to remove any intervention, and so I couldn't really demonstrate experimental control as much as I wanted to, and I didn't evaluate goal setting, which I did in my third study. And the third study, which we'll go into more detail here in this presentation. So the third study momentarily, and you can see my OBM network Tumblr, so make sure you get yours in the shop today. I want to evaluate the effectiveness of these different components on that recommendation of moving every 30 minutes. So there's kind of 2 avenues I could have selected, but instead of going with the volume, I went with moving every 30 minutes. So I think it's good to point out that workplace activity, it's behavioral. You're either sitting or not sitting or moving, walking, things like that. It's a behavior that can be shaped. I wanted to look at any possible maintenance effects. I wanted to evaluate how effective prompting might have been during that initial phase, especially for the non-responders, and then just refining the methodology, important research, collecting that single subject data, and just to kind of add to the literature. So getting to the methods, my participants here were on campus, so they were office workers. They were recruited through a wellness newsletter, and so they, people that are interested already in health and were interested in, they're probably a little more motivated than other people. I took note of kind of the desk arrangement, since this is in this kind of standing desk world. So I had 5 seated participants, one that had seated desks, and one person had a sit-stand unit, which I don't know how often they used it, but it was just kind of nice to note there. What I did was to track the objective activity. I used the Fitbit Zip, which is now I've been conducting this research for a couple of years. The Zip is starting to, it's one of their older models. They haven't updated in a while, so hopefully they'll still support it if you're looking at, conducting this type of research. But it's very simple. Accelerometer goes on the hip, very good at collecting steps. The data is synced on their smartphone. And then every day, myself or a researcher would go in through the dashboard, through a research account, and go ahead and access those steps. My dependent variable for workplace sitting was, in this study, active work bouts per day. Active work bouts per day. So what that looks like is that, again, with that 30-minute recommendation, 1 bout is every 30 minutes. And in that 30 minutes, to be considered active, which I wanted people to be more active, is that they needed to have at least a 30-minute interval that sums 100 or more steps. And so that criterion came from these exercise researchers who have established that it's good that an adult can walk on average 100 steps per minute. So we want that as the active. So we have 100 steps every 30 minutes, 1 active bout. Inactive would be less than 100 steps. And this would be based on the participant's work shift. So I couldn't, it wouldn't be feasible to go ahead and track their time cards every day in this arrangement. But once I interviewed them at the beginning of the study and they said I work 9 to 5, I would just select those 9 to 5 intervals, those half-hour bins, and collect the data from there. And then this is what the dashboard looks like when you get on the Fitbit website. You go ahead and log in, and you put your cursor over these bar graphs, and each of these is a 15-minute interval. What you'll do is this pops up. You take that number, add it to the other one, add them together. If it's more than 100, then you get an active bout. And you can see for this person, they likely worked from 8 o'clock, walking into the office, and left at 4. It looks like, and then they put their Fitbit in their desk. So for this study, the baseline phase included wearing the zip. I instructed them to go about their normal day and then seek at the end of the day. So we want to get a good idea of what the physical activity is just in your normal day-to-day work life. The next phases included this education, feedback, and goal setting phase, in which I gave them a formal script again, talked about the risks, gave them recommendations, and I gave them instructions on what to do. So if you need to get up and move every 30 minutes, you can go ahead and walk, go get a drink of water, things like that. And then every day and every week, I gave them performance feedback on how they were doing with their active bouts. So did you meet your goal, or did you not meet your goal? And that was the daily, just kind of verbal scripts here. And then the weekly feedback was, hey, you met 2 out of 5 days with your goal. And I made a little chart and gave them instructions and everything to help them, best understand what they were looking at. So that was that component package. And then for the non-responders, I did have a prompting procedure embedded in there, in which there's a handy little app. And if you have an iPhone, you could probably download it now. If you want to stand up and move more, I give that option to the iPhone users. And the one participant that did not have an iPhone, we went with the calendar reminders. So in Outlook, my message would come up and say, hey, it's time to move. And I watched her program those things. And this is what the app looks like for stand up. So it's real handy. You can select basically when you are coming into work, when you're leaving, how often, the frequency of when you want to move, and specifically while you're at the location. It's very handy for this type of research. So that was the prompting procedure. And this is what an ideal responder would look like for my study. So if I'm looking at slowly shaping behavior, what I want to see is a small baseline. Let's go ahead and get the pen here. I want to see, baseline stable, and slowly set a new goal, adhere to the new goals, and go up, remove it, and reinstate. And I set an arbitrary individual criteria at 80%. It's hard to draw with a mouse, but 80% there. And so once that happens, they would remove and go back. So that was the ideal responding pattern, but we all know how well research and humans behave. So let's see what happened. So if we're looking at this visually, we see with Jamie, we introduced the package. We got some good responding up here and baseline. We didn't have any there, so that was encouraging. But once we removed, responding went down. We brought it back a little bit better. But overall, Jamie was a very high responder to begin with. Rose, fairly, moderately active, inactive throughout the day. The intervention didn't do anything. Prompts didn't help. Remove the prompts. That didn't change anything. So Rose, my interventions were ineffective. Kathy here had some missing days here where she was off work, but it's variable data. We had some initial success, but then it dropped off. And then we saw, little effects after that. That's for the first group. The second group, again, with the weeks on the x-axis and the active bouts on the y-axis. Laura, she was my super responder. Great. She almost shaped too well. She went straight to the top of the criteria, had a few missing days, removed it, and then it came back. Molly, variable, not much effect. And for D, maybe you could say there would be kind of a slow, maybe like a slow increasing trend there. Oops, sorry. Got a question from Maggie. How long of a break does it need to be to count as no example of sitting? How many minutes per hour specifically. So the break was based on step counts. So let me just make sure I can read this question again. How long of a break does it need to be to count as a no example of sitting? So I didn't so much track sitting in this study. It was more about general activity. And so with the step counts, it just needed to be that 100 minutes or not. Does that make sense? Non-example. Let me try to reload my chat box here. It went out on me. Did that help? She said, cool. All right, perfect. Right, so if you're active for 100 steps, you're good to go. And if not, yeah. So the general findings with this study here. So the intervention was somewhat effective, I would say, for 2 out of 6 participants. We had that rapid shift there for Laura. Ineffective for the other 3 out of 6, and mixed results for Kathy. Seemed like we were going well, but then it didn't. I think the strength of this type of research is that I'm slowly developing a real practical, easy way to obtain these type of data. Again, going back to the group literature, when you specifically use accelerometers like actigraphs, participants wear them for about 2 weeks, and then they like mail them in. And then the researchers, these are like hundreds of participants. They mail them in, and then they get them 3 months later, wear them for 2 weeks. So that method doesn't exactly work if you want to see what happens in between those, pre and post tests. I would say, when it comes to using feedback and setting goals, it was promising, but there's a lot of variables in there that could maybe enhance the effectiveness of my type of interventions. And just, collecting a couple of social validity measures here through a post-study questionnaire. Barriers, very common, which I think we can all agree on here, is that the work demands, we have a deadline, we have something, we're in the zone, we're in that, quote, loosely speaking, flow state. And I get it. Like you need to complete something, 5 minutes goes past, and then maybe it's 30 minutes. Work demands are super important, right? I'm not paying them to move. I get some success without paying them to move, but they still need to keep their job, right? One participant even reported that this is unrelated to my study before I even started the intervention, she was written up for leaving her desk to go get a drink of water because she was supposed to be at her desk working, which is a very aversive environment. Not fun if you ask me. So that's barriers, the work demands, what that company culture is. When you're looking at taking 100 steps or more, it's not going to be salient. It's not going to be obvious in the environment whenever you do engage, unless you're constantly monitoring your Fitbit or looking at your app. I might go to my closet and back and it's only 90, or I might go and it's only 60. And I did take a break, and maybe that criteria, it's not obvious, it's not salient like I'm saying. But maybe I could do something where it's more of an alert. You've reached 100 steps, you're good to go. And sometimes what I found is that participants reported that the breaks were too frequent. So starting at that 30-minute criteria, maybe for some professions or individuals or opportunities to engage in activity, maybe 30 minutes is too stringent to begin with. Maybe we start at 60, maybe slowly shape back and figure out what is a good sweet spot for individuals. Because again, giving everybody a prescription of moving every 30 minutes, maybe it's not going to work for everybody. So that's huge opportunities there to keep the research going in this area. So future research, I believe, huge opportunities. So we can account for different health recommendations and individual employee preferences. So I have taken the strategy of like, hey, this is important. Let's go ahead and move. So I've pretty much decided for people, but what about maybe letting people decide which recommendation they want to follow? Maybe I'll have more success that way. So do you want to move every 30 minutes, or would you like to reduce the total time? And maybe we get better compliance with, accounting for employee preference that way. Maybe we can look at the type of physical activity. So I've always just said, hey, you can walk over there, but maybe, and I had this before where a participant, she was working at the front desk and she physically couldn't leave. So maybe just standing up would be a good metric for her. Like she's breaking sitting pattern, which we've been talking about the whole time, but maybe she can just get up and move and we can track that somehow. So looking at the topography of the physical activity and exercising at a desk. I get this question a lot. People say, oh, what do you think about a treadmill desk? Well, it could be good. What about a bike desk? All really good solutions. It's all about if you use them on a regular basis and if that's the only way that you can get physical activity. I'm working with a client of mine now where she works from home and she's at her computer 8-9 hours a day. And if she physically can't leave because she's got so many tasks to do, maybe she would be a good candidate for that treadmill desk, things like that. So looking at the topography would be good for future research. When it comes to the OBM literature, we could look at the PDC, Performance Diagnostic Checklist. So the approach of assessing workplace variables to figure out what is it about the work environment that promotes or does not promote physical activity, or promotes too much sitting. So again, I've hit on a couple of these with competing contingencies, having work autonomy. So can you freely leave? Are there, is your work under your own responsibility or somebody always looking over you? Things like that. I need to look at refining procedures to get individuals moving a little quicker. So prompting was one attempt. That didn't seem to do it. What else do I have to do? A further analysis. What are those variables? I haven't identified all the variables. Contingency management is a very useful a strategy to implementing health behavior change. Maybe we can incorporate that into physical activity in the workplace through HR, something like that. That would be interesting. That's it on the research. I just want to pause real quick. Is there anybody that has questions about research before we kind of move on to the real applications and what all this could potentially mean for the workplace? Going once, I'll let people type if they need to. Let me look at my chat box here. I'm looking down at the iPad. Whoop, sorry, feedback. Dana says I have to leave. Can you send me the article? Sure. Yep. I can do that. Sorry, I'm getting feedback. 1 second. I was getting feedback from doing that on my iPad. Okay. No other questions? Going once, going twice? All right, so let's go ahead and look at what all this kind of means. So when I was thinking about preparing this talk, I thought, well, we're talking about sitting, standing. We still got to work all day. The sitting time impact productivity. If we're interested in behavior analysis in the workplace, implementing OBM solutions, we don't want to make people less productive. With sitting time, improve productivity. And really, it comes down to, the more I've done this, it's like, does any of this really matter? So there's some questions that I just want to throw out there and just put a couple ideas out there for what we want to think about when it comes to making a difference in the workplace. So we think about identifying variables and metrics when we're looking at business solutions for health and wellness. The idea here is that does working and standing more, if I'm standing at my desk, is it going to produce more improvements in leading indicators? So if I'm in a sales call, am I going to improve my daily sales call frequency count? Are my weekly presentations going to improve in some way? Am I going to be producing more blog posts, right? Things like that. What about lagging indicators? So would having a staff that stands more, will that produce more revenue? Will customers be happier? And, this is going to be, it's kind of a bit of a disconnect, but, will there be more blog followers because we stand more? Probably not, but it'd be interesting things to kind of look at. So when I thought about the word productivity and workplace and health and sitting, this definition came from a blog that I put together for ABA Tech, in which I have linked, which I can share. But if we're talking about productivity, the definition here, WikiHow, there's many different definitions, but I think this is good just for argument's sake. It's the value of the work the worker completes in an average hour. So think about what we do every day. It's not necessarily hourly, but when it comes to completing work in an hour here, what productivity is actually measured with is total work hours of like a company based on like the GDP. So you got so many hours, and how productive are we? How does this relate to outputs inputs and outputs. We put in the hours, how much product comes out. But the issue, I think, is that we live in a knowledge economy. So, most, if not everybody attending this webinar, we don't make widgets, and that's kind of what this is all based on. Like, how many reports are you making? How many papers are you writing? It doesn't exactly line up for like what our day-to-day is really like. So if you were to just Google real quick, you can do this now or later. If you type in standing desks and productivity, you just get mixed results of like, well, Nick's telling me about how moving is good, but what's the truth about it? And standing desks could be harmful to your productivity and things like this. Well, I just want to remind everybody that what do we know in research? Correlation does not always equal causation. So just because somebody's standing doesn't mean to say that they're more or less productive. What does that mean? If we look at the research here, again, these articles, once you dig into them, and I dug into a couple, you can do it yourself. What you find is that productivity is measured in different ways outside of the term that I just used before. So I talked about inputs and outputs as far as man hours and GDP or woman hours. The measures, all these different sources, productivity is measured by sales calls, human eyeball, neural activity, reading comprehension, creativity, mental state, and our colleague Julie Slowiak through the OBM network, she's looked at keyboard entries, like completing certain documents in a particular time frame. And so calling a couple things productive and not would be okay if we were all measuring the same thing. And so what happens is all these studies that I just described are not using the same dependent variable. And again, going back to this, correlation does not equal causation. So, we can make our best judgments here. So the issues here with productivity, which I've hit on, they're conceptual. So we're not using the same definitions. We're measuring two different things. This is a language-based measure, creativity. We need to have a certain bit of knowledge versus eyeball activity and productivity, biology. They're not the best behavioral definitions, but some of them are pretty good. And when we talk about productivity, the measures on the GDP to conduct these for large companies, these are like super long, multi-year measures. So we have that, but then the productivity we talk about in these studies are just short 2 to 3 month windows. So generalizing from here to here is, the difficulty with, external validity of research. And there's practical issues too. So you have, there's so many resources that calculate productivity. Like how do you compare your man hours of your job force with, GDP? How do you calculate all these things? You have to have a whole staff to do this. You have to report to the media, things like that. Oftentimes when we look at productivity, the metrics are super delayed. And what do we know about reinforcement and feedback? That meaningful consequences need to be specific, contingent, immediate. And so the issues, like with these block headlines, is that we want the results today. We want to be productive now. So if I stand more, am I going to be productive now? I don't know. It's hard to tell what that looks like. And another practical issue here is that sedentary workers can still be productive in today's knowledge economy. I can still type and create just as well as that somebody might be standing, but how do you measure that? The question here that Jenny is sharing with me, so Maggie asks, have there been any studies using the PDC related to fitness, activity? Interesting thought. Maggie, great question. That's something I'm kind of working on with my dissertation. So how can I look at using the PDC or a similar type tool to analyze those variables which I can control to hopefully turn on and off, physical activity in the workplace. So thank you for that question, Maggie. So when we're looking at productivity, sitting, workplace behavior, saying that we might or might not be more productive, it's just not good enough. Why? Because we're behavior analysts and we want to look at the actual data. So we need the data to say we are being more productive or we're not. So rather than just saying, hey, and complain and be like, we can't do this, well, maybe we can. And so this is just kind of my idea, my thoughts of how you would measure, both healthy behaviors and maybe productive behaviors in the workplace. So step one, what does the OBMer do? So you pinpoint the productivity metrics. So you could look at tracking the number of blogs written per week. These are objective data. Look at blog submissions. Step two, pinpoint a health metric. So maybe report, track the number of reported instances of back pain. Does that happen on a weekly or monthly schedule? Step 3, take data on each. We love data. So you collect and monitor data on blogs and back pain. So you pinpoint, we take data. Step 4, we intervene. What does that look like? For blogs, maybe give feedback. For back pain, try standing desk and see what happens after those interventions. And then this is just classic consulting, review the data and troubleshoot. So we determine if blog productivity increased as a function of either feedback or back pain decreasing. We can go from there. Might not be perfect, but at least it's something more systematic, more objective, and more aligned with what we believe, is a successful intervention using applied behavior analysis. So as we kind of wrap up here, the last 5 to 10 minutes, I've said a lot about health research. I've talked a little bit about my own, introduced productivity, just a couple parting things, not to leave you completely high and dry here. So if we look at this from a behavioral framework, we want to do a couple of things. We can manipulate antecedents. So what are those antecedents in the workplace that are helpful to reduce sitting? We can assess individual motivation. I haven't done that with my participants. We could look at changing the physical work environment. You can see for me, I do not have a chair in my office. I have a plyometric box. Maybe I'll stretch a little bit. I have a footrest, things like that. Look at the furniture, make a standing desk, remove chairs. Removing chairs seems like the easiest thing. You go to a conference. We all got back from San Diego. You go into a room, 500 chairs, about 95% of people, if not all of them, are sitting down. If you take away less chairs, or if you take away some chairs, what's going to happen? People might stand and move more. Set timers. That's a nice antecedent prompt. Rearranging our work schedule such that we don't go long bouts of 3 to 5 hours without leaving our office. Maybe we can work for a couple hours, go to the cafeteria, work there, come back, things like that. Like, think about where you're working and how you're working. Can you complete tasks somewhere else? Maybe you see peers, and I've experienced this myself, where my research and behaviors kind of rubbed off on others, and I see people now standing more, and I see that as a prompt. Like, oh, they're standing. It's been a while for me, so I need to get up and move too. Seek out active work. Maybe that's a complete shift for you. So you've spent a lot of your days sedentary at the computer, and maybe you're just tired of it. You can just go get a new, more active job, become a lumberjack. I don't know. Setting goals, those may be helpful. Changing work culture and policy, that's just that's going to be a long task, but that is an antecedent. If we look at the consequences, measuring and tracking behavior could be helpful. Teaching self-management skills when it comes to, I've been sitting for this long, keep track of it. Providing meaningful consequences that are individualized, delivering feedback, and what really comes down to is we just want to reinforce additional activity, more breaks in the sedentary pattern, less sitting, and reinforcing less volume of sedentary behavior. So just to kind of wrap up here, we see just through kind of my initiative, we have friends of the OBM network. We have Adam Ventura, Byron Wine, Julie Slowiak, our own director, Manny Rodriguez. This has just kind of been my own take on trying to get people, highlighting people that have been moving more and taking a note of how important it is to move. And this, if you go to my website, it's just a brief Q&A of how people have improved their work life just through standing and moving more, having, you can see different work setups here, standing desks. They look like they might have similar ones, but you can see a variety of work setups. You can visit and join if you want to. Just email me, and I'll get you in there. And also, as we wrap up here, sitting, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's not isolated. There's other things going on. There's so many variables happening. So if we look at this from, an OBM perspective, maybe we take like a systematic approach to, taking charge of the sitting behavior business. So we look at 3 levels, from a behavioral systems analysis. We look at the organizational level. So how is culture and policy impacted? How do they impact activity in the workplace? Behavior-based safety, maybe it fits in there somehow. Typically, we look at slip, trips, and falls, but for office workers, maybe we need to get more sitting less in there. If we're looking at the systems level, looking at the work tasks and those competing contingencies, which I've learned from my, my 20 to 30 participants that I've had in my research, that there are some other things systematically going on that impacts how much you stand and move. And looking at the individual performer level. So we look at individual motivation, changing the environment, what's somebody's learning history. If they've just been sitting down on the job for 25 years, think about that as 25 years of reinforced sitting in a way. And it's going to take a little bit to move. So what does that look like? Can we program reinforcement for that increases in activity? So that's kind of what BehaviorFit's been about, just kind of creating a movement about movement just for individuals and organizations. So my feeble attempts at looking at the organizational level, so I've been a part of the wellness committee, which has been here at UF, which has been super fruitful. So learning what people's jobs are in HR, what initiatives are happening in a large organization. It's been very helpful to figure out how can I add value to wellness initiatives, at a university specifically. I've began, consulting with conference organizers to bring in more healthy habits and routines and behavior change principles. Starting to work with private companies as far as, okay, if this is what you want to do and health is valuable to your organization, let's go ahead and make that a priority. Systems level, everything's part of a system, of course, but my research has really kind of shown me that, look at medical coders, they're part of a system, and if you take them out, if you want to have them move more, that's going to affect daily productivity for sure, and different health behaviors that we want them to engage in. And I've had more success lately with the individual performer level. Again, looking at my research, giving workshops and talk like this. So maybe somebody that attended the seminar or watches it online at a later date will be now motivated to move a little bit more. Very active on social media. I have my standing initiative, a monthly blog. So these are kind of just different ways I've looked at trying to impact all this sitting stuff at different levels of analysis. And so in summary, looks like I'm wrapping up on time here, which is everybody's always excited for. The key message here is we need to sit less, we need to move more. The health benefits of movement are clear. We live in an amazing time of incredible research, so we know exactly the formula to live a healthier life, and movement is a key ingredient here. I went on a little tangent on productivity. It may be impacted, it may not, but I think actually measuring something and determining if productivity is really impacted is way better than just guessing if it is or not. And there's many research opportunities if you're just getting started in research or want a new idea for a new area to target. Huge opportunity here for more research in sedentary behavior, and just move. We just got to keep moving, everybody. So finished up a couple minutes early. So if you're interested in more, want to ask me more in-depth questions, next week I have I have a Facebook Live going on. You can go there and ask me specific questions, and maybe have one later that you don't have right now. But I have a few presentations coming up in August, September, and October. So I'll be doing a CE webinar in August, and I have this dissertation thing to complete next spring. So if you want to come cheer me on next April or May, that would be great. Here's my contact information. So go ahead and follow me here. Let me know if you have any questions. And that's all I have for you today. So let me go ahead and look at the box. And thank you for everybody that's attending and have listened so far. Any questions? Let me go ahead and back out here. I took the sharing off. All right. Maggie, I think becoming a lumberjack is a potential intervention. That would be good. You totally get rid of the sedentary activity. Any tips, Dennis, for building a good standing desk? Really, I made an infographic, but it's really, you just have to build it based on how high you are and how tall you are. I'm one for function over form, so just finding a platform that is measured on your height, which is good. And also, a key thing that people that they leave out is that your monitor needs to be at eye level. So sometimes you have people that have a desk set up, but you're kind of looking like this, and so your neck over time will get fatigued. So it's good to have your laptop up high, this way, and then have an external keyboard so your hands can be down, but your eyes still look up. So that would be a big tip I have there. Maggie asks, any tips for getting students to stand up other than prompting once an hour? Yeah, prompt every half an hour. No, I'm just kidding. For those of us that have a workplace that is a university or school, when you say students, Maggie, are you a student? I don't recall. I mean, you can build in like certain breaks and everything. I don't think I'm allowed to take away desk chairs, but oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, so one thing I've thought about, like for conferences, what we're doing for the Indiana ABA is that you have chairs available, which is good. So you want to give people preferences. I'm sure there's some HR laws in there somewhere, but maybe just have some bar height tables at the back where people get the option. They walk into a room, oh, I can go sit down, or I can go stand up at this table. So that would be more of like a different built environment manipulation. So yes, you don't want to take everybody's option of sitting away, but you just want to give people more options to stand. I like that idea for conferences. Yeah, I went to a couple conferences. One was specifically about sitting. It was called the Sedentary Behavior Conference. I wrote a blog about it. But what they did was they scheduled every speaker to only last for 20 minutes. So that means is every 20 minutes, people were hustling, bustling around, and they prompted that everybody got a standing ovation. Now, whether or not they all earned it, that's subjective, of course. But I think that was a real kind of neat, just antecedent kind of workaround there, just to facilitate more activity. So maybe break your lectures up into 20-minute sections. Suggest the ABI next year? Yeah, I think so. Who do I gotta talk to? It's interesting at ABA. For those of us who are watching this at a later date that aren't familiar with ABA, it's just the International Behavior Analysis Conference, and I was standing in the back of the conference, and a guy that was counting heads, for attendees and everything, said, "Hey, you can't stand up." I was like, "What? What are you talking about?" I was like, "Yeah, it's just my boss told me to say that," which he was misinformed. Then I got back to it, and then eventually I talked to some conference manager, and I said, "Hey, I kind of do the sitting stuff. I know it's bad for us. So who do I got to talk to about furniture?" But there's a whole list of people to go through. But yes, if you know somebody that orders the furniture for conferences, I say let's order more bar height tables in the back. Give people options. For those that have been working at workplace, yeah. So yeah, I think for you can build in breaks for your discussions on campus. Giving bar height tables, things like that. Any other questions? I'm here for as long as you need me to. Maggie, very studies. Okay. Thanks so much. Thank you, Maggie. Yeah, feel free to reach out if you have any other questions. And thank you guys for coming. You're welcome, Dennis. Thank you for attending.